Welcome to another Steer Your Career podcast. On this podcast, I have a very special guest, Nausheen Chen. I found her on LinkedIn. She's very prevalent there. She is an expert at public speaking. But you know what? If you can speak in public, you can also speak one-on-one with informational interviews and with interviews. So we're going to dig deep here about what are the two biggest blockers to someone being an effective communicator in interviews and some tips on how to overcome those obstacles. So I think you'll really enjoy this conversation with me and Nausheen. But before we go into that episode, let me remind you, if you are an ambitious professional and you are ready to own your career, we at Academic Careers can help empower you to do that more quickly, more confidently, and with lots more money. We help do that in three different ways. We have digital courses, we have group coaching, and we have personalized coaching that is catered to you that will help you get more interviews and will help those interviews turn to more offers and will turn those offers into more money through our negotiation services. So check out our website at academiccareers.com. Listen to this episode with Nausheen and I. And if you like this episode, please rate and review and share it with a friend or two so that other people can learn to own your career. Welcome to another episode of the Steer Your Career podcast. Today, I'm very excited to have Nausheen Chen on our podcast. She is the first guest we've ever had here with purple hair. So for those of you that are not watching this on video, when you watch it on YouTube or elsewhere, you will see that she has awesome hair. I'm very jealous, not just the amount of it, because I don't have that much, but also the color of it. But that is not why we invited Nausheen on here. We invited Nausheen on here because she is an expert at speaking effectively and confidently. She helps people to grow their influence and authority when you speak anywhere. She does it often for like public speaking, but as it is so critical for individuals to communicate their story, their narrative in informational interviews and real interviews, I wanted to invite Nausheen on to share some of her perspective. But before she does that, Nausheen, tell the Steer Your Career audience a little bit about you.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here, Alan. I was looking forward to this conversation and super excited to be here. One of those annoying kids who always gets up in front of their family and recites the most boring poem ever. I used to be that annoying kid. I've been in love with speaking on stages and speaking on camera for as long as I can remember. I just took the really long way around getting there. So my career has been a real pastiche in terms of all the different things that I've done, all the detours that I've taken that were not really detours at the end of the day because I learned from every single experience. But I took the route of going through the corporate world. I was in Procter & Gamble in the Fortune 50 world for a while. That's where I got training on being a communication skills trainer. I loved that, loved doing that. Wasn't even part of my actual job, but I never realized that I should go in that direction instead of marketing and PR, which is what I did for the longest time. Then became an entrepreneur for the first time as I was diving into improv, stand-up comedy, being on stage. At one point, I was producing, scripting, and acting in a crappy little late night comedy show. And from there, went on to make films. Became an entrepreneur for the first time, was a filmmaker for 7 years, till I realized that I didn't really identify as being a filmmaker at all. And the only thing that I enjoyed was working with my on-screen talent to make sure that the performances that we were getting were the most impactful, the most strong performances that we could get, both from actors, but also from these CEOs who were speaking on camera for the first time. So that's where I realized that my passion for not just showing up on camera or on stage myself, but also helping others do that with power and impact. That's where I should focus all my strength and all my energy on. And that led me to becoming a full-time public speaking coach.
That's awesome. And it sounds like when you were at P&G, you were not brought on for a communication and speaking coach. I think you were associate brand manager there, which is a very highly prestigious role at a company like P&G. But it seems like you leaned into your strength Like, how did people either identify it? Did you try to go into that path? Did people suggest it for you? Or how did you move from a brand manager at P&G to one of the leading experts on public communication?
I've always been in love with speaking on stages, so I found myself seeking out every speaking opportunity I could. And when I became a trainer, then I started training whenever I could and doing workshops, but everything was on the side. So no one ever pointed that out to me. No one ever said that, oh, maybe you should go into full-time training. Where that love did lead me was to the stage, to being on camera and then behind the camera, and really exploring media and exploring performance from those different aspects. I ended up going for a master's program in New York on media studies. And it all happened very organically, where as a filmmaker, I realized that I never wanted to be this visionary director, but I was always by my actors called the actor's director. And they always said that we love working with you because you're not as bothered about the lighting or the angles or the tech side of it. You really want to work with us, which is not the best thing if you want to make great films, because you do have to worry about all the other stuff. So it all kind of happened in a way where I was taking these great detours because I've always been an experimenter. I've always been the kind of person who's asked herself, how deep does this rabbit hole go? Where can I take this? Public speaking coaching was the very first time that I intentionally took control of my career instead of just going with the flow and seeing where things take me.
And it seems like it's a natural talent for you. You've spoken as a child, you've spoken as an adult. It's a strength of yours, something that there's no fear for you going up on a public stage, it seems. Or is that just the appearance that you give off? But lack of
It's
fear and
fascinating.
just let's just go up there and do it.
It's fascinating that you bring that up because I've thought about this a lot myself. Of course, the clients that I work with, a lot of them come to me with stage fright, with all kinds of anxiety and nerves that they're working through. So, from a young age, I did somehow manage to pick up the art and skill of portraying confidence. But I will say that throughout my teens and my 20s and even my early 30s, I was pretty much just portraying confidence and faking confidence versus feeling that inner confidence. So I would go up on stage. Yes, I wouldn't feel nervous. My mind wouldn't go blank. I'd be able to present and connect with the audience and engage because I enjoyed being in the spotlight. But when I would step off the stage, I would feel awful. I would feel like I was crumbling
Really?
inside because I didn't believe that I deserved that attention because I felt like I was faking it. And that feeling is awful. It eats away
Huh.
at you.
Interesting. Because I generally,
And
oh,
then
sorry, go ahead.
when I started coaching public speaking, and I started really diving deep into it as an art and a discipline. Because you could think of me as, you can analogize this to a native speaker of a language, right? When you learn a language, you're not really analyzing its grammar or figuring out all the great works of literature that have been written in the language. You just pick it up, you acquire it. You don't really understand how it works. You just know how to speak in that language. So I was very much like that. But then when I started going into coaching, that's when I took a step back and looked at everything that I had learned and aimed to distill it into a system and figured out where were my blind spots and realized that, yes, it's absolutely possible to fake confidence. And I never want to teach that to my clients because I never want them to go through that feeling of feeling like an imposter after the fact.
Interesting. That's interesting. I've always felt more nervous before, and then after I'm like, oh, that wasn't so bad. And maybe I'm projecting that on other folks. That's a feeling they're having too, but maybe I'm just projecting because that's how I feel sometimes.
No, that's absolutely more common. It's absolutely more common to feel more nervous before, and then afterwards you feel like it's not that bad because it really wasn't. And that's when you're building up that fear, that anticipation, and almost letting that control you, replace any positive feelings you might develop for that particular speaking engagement. And that's where you let the anxieties get the better of you.
Yeah. So the people that you work with and you coach, they're trying to speak on big public stages, or what are they coming to you for? What is their goal after working with you?
I work primarily with two types of people. There are your corporate execs who know that being visible is what gets them growth, what gets them promotions, what future proofs their career. But very often, these are painfully shy or introverted or awkward folks who just don't enjoy being in the
Mhm.
spotlight, and they don't feel like they excel when they're presenting, when all eyes are on them and the pressure is on to perform. So that's one group that I work with. And their challenges are very similar to the challenges that you've been pointing out and talking about. And there's another group, which is basically entrepreneurs who want to build their personal brands, who want to get on great podcasts like this one, who want to make sure that they're doing great webinars, that they're growing their business, they're establishing credibility and authority, regardless of where they speak, whether it's on a big stage at an industry conference, for example, or on camera creating their own videos for their social media. And for them, it's absolutely crucial to master that art of creating authority and influence when they
Yeah,
speak.
and the authority and influence is a key aspect. How does that differ from one-on-one conversations? Because a lot of our clients at Kadima, some of them have challenges with communicating in a one-on-one setting. Again, whether it's an informational interview with somebody to build that rapport, or an interview, a job
Mm.
interview, where you're trying to build that authority, you're trying to get people to like you and to trust you, to hire you. What are some of the,
Mm.
if there are, like, are there differences between the one-on-one being to build the knowing authority and the trust versus the public speaking?
A strong communicator is a strong communicator is a
Yeah.
strong communicator.
Yeah.
Anyone who understands how to make sure that their point gets across in the best, most impactful way knows how to do that in any setting. So, yeah, there are absolutely parallels between the one on one setting and the one to many setting.
So thinking about that with your expertise with folks with the one-to-many setting and trying to build that authority and the trust, and what are some of the key challenges that a lot of your clients face coming in? What are some of the top challenges that they have? And also, as you bring those up, maybe we can talk about how you work to get them over those obstacles, past those obstacles.
There's usually two key challenges that I've seen people struggle with. The first one is nerves, for sure. Nerves, anxiety, and that there's a spectrum there. There are folks that have extreme anxiety, people that can't function at all when they're on a stage. I've actually heard people say that, oh, very early on in my career, I told my boss, don't ever make me present. And that's just the way that I've worked through my career. And that makes me
Yeah.
really sad because imagine the number of opportunities you've said no to just because you've
Yeah.
embraced that fear instead of
And
embracing
that
growth.
leader is basically enabling your lack of like growth as well. Yeah.
That's true. I
Yeah.
didn't think of
But
that.
anyway, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Instead of pushing you out, they're saying yes. So there's that big challenge, which ranges from that extreme stage fright that I was talking about, where I've worked with clients who have such intense feelings of anxiety and stage fright that they've gone on stage, forgotten what they had to say, and have had to run off, and they feel humiliated and traumatized and embarrassed, and they never want to speak to an audience ever again because they just can't figure out how to not let the nerves control them. And then, of course, there's a spectrum. So at the other end, there are people who feel some level of anxiety, some level of nerves, which affects the way that they come across. So they do function, they can get through a conversation, an interview, a podcast, but at the end, they feel like they could have done better if they hadn't felt as nervous. They could have been more concise, more precise, more impactful. So, nerves, that's one big challenge. The second challenge is okay, let's say you don't feel the nerves. You do feel confident, you're fine. But at the end, when you actually deliver a presentation or go through an interview, you're average, below average, mediocre. You're not really using your voice the best possible way you can. Maybe you ramble and go off on tangents. Maybe you use too much jargon and people get lost and they don't really understand your message. Maybe you don't show up with the best body language, the best energy, so people don't really engage with you or feel like they can relate to you. So that forms a whole second challenge where the idea is to make sure that you become the most impactful speaker, regardless of the platform or the audience.
I've heard this data before that when people communicate, what is really being heard is only like 7% of the words, and I think 38% of the body language, and like 45% of the tone. I but like the words themselves are a very small portion of that. Are you familiar with this like 738 number or something like
Yes.
that? I might have the number slightly wrong, but
This
I know the words are the least important thing in the communication.
Yes and no. So this research has actually been very
Okay.
controversial and it's
Okay.
misquoted all the
Good.
time.
Please correct me.
But there's good news and bad news. The good news is that yes, your words do matter. The bad news is this particular research somehow seems to overshadow any other research that has been done. So no one else can claim with that level of conviction that people understand you based on your words. And this is how much they understand you based on your words and how much they understand you based on your body language and your tone. There really isn't definitive research that everyone can agree on. But what the upshot is, that's something that people do agree on, is that body language and tone are very important. And very often people don't understand that they need to work on the delivery, not just the message. Whenever you need to do a presentation, for example, the first thing, and very often the last thing that people do, is work on their PowerPoint slides. And they feel like, yeah, the work is done, the presentation's ready. No, it's only half done because you haven't actually figured out the best way to deliver it. If the presentation itself, the content itself is the main thing, it may as well be an email. Why do you need to be there?
Right. My hunch is people spend too much time on the content and too little time on practicing the delivery of that content.
Yeah, very often.
So you work with clients probably to focus on practicing the delivery of that sort of content. And whether it's a PowerPoint presentation or an interview, which I don't think you work on that so much, but your work, I'm sure, would work amazingly on that. What are some of the tactics? So the nerves are one thing, and let's talk about the nerves first. So, like the nerves and the anxiety. Maybe that's why they're spending so much time on the content, because they're just avoiding the hard part of actually communicating. But I don't know if we can figure that out definitively. What are some of the things that you work with your clients on to get over or get past those nerves and anxiety so that they don't ask their boss, hey, don't put me on the stage. I don't want to deal with this. What do you do to get people past opting out of these opportunities?
There are three things that you can do that will really help with the nerves. The first one is, of course, mindset. The body produces the same physiological response to nerves and excitement. When you feel really nervous about something or when you're really excited, your heart starts beating faster. You might get sweaty palms. You might keep obsessing over the thing that you're nervous or excited about. You might feel butterflies in your tummy in terms of anticipation. So, if the body produces the same physiological response, then it's up to your brain to label that emotion. And that has been a powerful shift for a lot of people, where instead of thinking, I'm dreading this, I'm so scared of this, I'm so stressed out, you change the way that you're labeling that emotion and say, I really care about this. I'm really excited that I get this opportunity to speak to these people. And the reason why I'm feeling all these emotions is because I care about the outcome. I care about the audience. I'm not indifferent. And so that leads you to changing the focus from you to the audience. Every time I walk into a room or a webinar or a presentation where I feel like the stakes are high, where it's giving me some amount of nervousness or anxiety, I tell myself that I'm not there to impress anyone. It's not about me, it's about how I can help someone. If someone can walk away knowledge rich after the session, if someone can change something about the way they speak that leads them to a better opportunity, then I've done my job. And that makes it simpler because most people are not just talking about things that they don't know anything about. Most people are talking about things they have deep expertise in. So the job is just to get across, create that conversation, and help. So that's the entire mindset piece that really helps with battling the nerves.
And putting yourself in the perspective of the audience. So, like, what value can you deliver that is valuable to that audience? Is that kind of rather than worry about what people are focusing on me, but what value am I providing the audience?
Everyone is selfish. And that's good news in this scenario because your audience is there not to judge you, unless it's American Idol, in which case they are. But a regular audience or a regular interviewer, for example, they're not there to judge you. They're just there to figure out what it is that you bring to the table, how you can help the company, how you can help the team that you're going to be a part of,
Yeah.
what you can contribute.
Yeah, and that's so key. And in terms of knowing the audience, knowing what that audience wants, and with a one-on-one conversation, it's actually fairly easy to do a little bit of research, either checking on LinkedIn, maybe checking their social profile of what does Nausheen care about? She travels a lot, so maybe I'll talk to her about like her latest travels or something like that. So to relate, build that rapport, I think is critical also by understanding the audience. So you talk about
Absolutely.
mindset. I think you said there were three things that can help with the nerves. So mindset. Do you mind
Yes.
sharing the other two?
For sure. So the second one is more actionable. It has to do with the minutes leading up to being on camera, or in this case, going for the interview or being on stage. Very often, people don't warm up, they don't get into the zone, so to speak, and they hit the stage very cold. It feels like they need time then to warm up as they're already on stage. So you might have noticed that very often you'll find that people get into the swing of things after a few minutes. That's when they really start enjoying their
Yeah.
time on stage, or in an interview after the first few minutes, they feel like, yeah, now I'm getting into it. I'm in the zone. Warming up beforehand gets rid of those nerves and anxiety before you need to actually perform, quote unquote. So, warming up is essential, and creating a routine that works for you is super important there. I teach people different kinds of warm ups. You can do physical warm ups, like the kind you would do before you go to the gym. You can do vocal warm ups, the kind that singers do before they go on stage. You can do expression and enunciation warm ups, the kind that actors do before they need to be on camera. There's a whole variety, and it doesn't take very long. It takes a solid 5 minutes before you need to be on camera or on stage. And every time I've had clients try this out, they've said, wow, that was transformative. I felt so much more confident, so much more in control of what I had to say, so much more connected with the audience just because they took time to warm up. So that's a great strategy to get rid of the nerves. And the third piece is also connected to the mindset, where I encourage folks to set up what I call this virtuous cycle, where what we're looking at is, what is the source of that anxiety and those nerves before you need to speak? It's usually linked to some kind of an imposter syndrome, the fear of not being able to perform as well as you want to or need to, the fear of forgetting what you had to say. Every single opportunity, every single time that you speak anywhere, take that as proof you can do it again. And what that requires is debriefing with yourself after every time that you do an interview, that you do a presentation, that you're on a podcast. Debrief with yourself. Tell yourself what are the things that went well, which is really important. Most people just focus on their faults. Really telling yourself that I did this well, and I did this well, and I did this well. Take that as proof for the next time that you have a negative voice in your head saying you can't do this. Counter it, challenge it with that proof, and say, actually, last month I spoke there, or I had this interview, or I had this conversation, and I did quite okay. These are the things that I did really well. This is not the first time that I'm going to go and do this. That helps create that virtuous cycle for you. And it really feeds itself, because every time you debrief, every time you tell yourself what you did well, you create more and more awareness in terms of who you really are, what your skills are, what you can keep building on.
Yeah, that's so critical. And it's like reframing into like from instead of what can go wrong into what has gone
Mhm.
right before and how you are capable of doing that again, which is actually the more likely
Yeah.
outcome anyway. So you talked about like two largest challenges you see your clients with, one with the nerves and anxiety, secondly with like the tone and delivery,
Mm.
I think you were saying. What are some of the challenges with the tone and delivery? And more importantly, what are some tips and tricks and strategies that you work with your clients to focus on that? So they get past the nerves, they're on stage or they're in the interview, and now they're ready to deliver their authoritative and effective communication. So how can they do that effectively?
And I'm going to say it's definitely tone and delivery, but also the
Okay,
content,
yeah.
the
Yeah,
way
yeah.
that you're framing your
Tone,
thoughts
tone
and
delivery,
sharing
yeah.
the
Tone
content.
delivery content, sorry.
Yeah. So, in terms of the content, it's about making sure that you're concise and that you're able to deliver a single message each time that you speak instead of bombarding the audience with 20 different messages and speaking for 10 minutes nonstop. And of course, the tone, the delivery, the speed at which you speak, the way that you're enunciating, using your body language, emphasizing certain words, making sure that you're expressing with your face, with your emotions, all of that ties in. There's, of course, this great marriage that happens between the content and the delivery. If you're giving yourself the right kind of content to speak, then you're going to be able to deliver it in the best possible way. Dry, boring, or rambling content is very hard to package well with nice delivery. So the two have to absolutely work together. There are a lot of things that you can do to make sure that you're concise, clear, and on track when you speak in terms of the content, and that you're engaging and dynamic in terms of the tone and the delivery.
So I would imagine practice would help. Are there other things to improve
Mm.
your tone delivery content? Are there tips to improve that besides practice? Practice and
Yeah,
getting
and
feedback.
practice is for sure. Yeah, practice is the number one thing. I'm glad you added getting feedback, because
Yeah,
just
yeah.
practicing
Right here.
doesn't help if you're just practicing in a void, which a lot of people do, right? They practice their stories in their head, they practice how they're going to respond to questions in their head. They never actually practice it out loud, and if they do, they never actually record it to review it themselves, and if they do, they never get feedback on it.
Yeah. I,
So there are so many blind spots that all of us
I know.
have that we just never
Yeah, like
investigate.
when I was in the early days of interviewing, like I'm a very competent interviewer. Like you are a very good public speaker. I'm just naturally good at being interviewed for jobs. Early on, I would just rehearse this stuff in my head, and I found rehearsing it in my head would not effectively prepare me for interviews. Then what I did was
Mm-hmm.
say it out loud in front of the mirror while I was like getting ready in the morning
Mm-hmm.
about answering these questions. And sometimes when I'd go on a walk, I would be talking very low so I wasn't seen as too crazy, but like rehearsing my star stories. And that was better. What I found the
Mm-hmm.
best was when I was in business school, we had the opportunity to get video recorded with mock interviews.
Mm-hmm.
And so going through the practice out loud and watching yourself on videotape, even though videotape, for those that are young, it used to be before everything was recorded online. It used to be actually on a tape. But watching that replay, I would see that I was saying so many ums. I actually noticed that I was only
Mm-hmm.
using one hand. I was sitting on one hand and I just kept going like this with one hand. So it just looked really odd the whole time. And that alone
Mm-hmm.
helped phenomenally. Just fixing, I still have not eliminated the ums, but I'm very conscious of using both hands when I talk after that. And I am conscious of the ums, but I have not
Mm-hmm.
totally solved that.
Yeah. So that's where practice really helps, especially when you're reviewing yourself. And along with that, understanding actually goes into strong speaking. So I teach this framework called the Strong Speakers Toolkit, where you gain an understanding of how to use your voice, how to show up with the right kind of energy, and how to use your body language. Call that the magic trifecta of delivery. And that really helps, because then whenever you practice, you know what you're going for instead of just practicing or trying to just be great when you don't really know what that means. This breaks it down. And then I encourage everyone to go and look at the next time that you watch a TED Talk, for example, analyze how the speaker is using their voice, their energy, and their body language, which includes your expressions. And you'll notice that every strong speaker plays with these three factors.
So voice, energy, body language, focus less on the content. So the content you should have down pat almost, and then the delivery with the voice,
Mm.
the energy and the body language is how it's delivered. Because like the content you said is very important.
For the content, if it's something like a presentation or specific answers to questions that you're expecting. Tell me about yourself. You should have something prepared for that, but not memorize
Right.
word for word. I never advocate for that unless you're doing a TEDx talk. That's possibly the only time where I would recommend that you memorize what you have to say. But in an interview, it's more about internalizing the key points you want to hit, the key beats in the story, the narrative that you're telling. So, absolutely being very sure of the content if you have had time to prepare for it. Or let's say that you're getting a question that you just haven't prepared for. It can happen. Knowing how to deal with that in that scenario so that you're not just fumbling for words and you're not just rambling because you feel so nervous that you need to get more things out to make up for it. Making sure that you're following that really helps in that scenario in terms of making sure that your content is concise. So, for example, the rule of three is something that is really easy to follow. In terms of stories, a specific story structure, you can have context, action, result, for example, so that you stay on track. So, organizing and structuring information, even if you haven't had time to prepare for it, that's what will take care of the content piece of it. And then, yes, focusing on the delivery.
This has been so jam packed with such important advice and suggestions, and I'm always trying to improve my public speaking. And here's a question for you that I get feedback on with my public speaking, sometimes on the positive side, sometimes on the negative. And I don't know if this goes under content or what. What are you cursing? I'm fucking excited to be here today versus I'm really excited to be here today. Or just for example, or cursing in general. Is there any, do you have a personal opinion on there? And is there any research on when it works, when it doesn't work, and when it doesn't really matter one way or the other?
For me, it comes down to the environment and your personal brand. And me, of course, coming from a PR and a corporate background, and now being in a position where I'm more independent, it still impacts the way that I speak. So, for example, me, my personal brand is that I will very rarely swear if I'm on camera or if I'm on stage. That's a personal decision. And that's where the personal brand comes in. I meet a lot of people for whom it's a part of their personal brand to swear. They stand for that. They stand for that kind of raw energy that they want to give out. But then it's a marriage between that, what your personal values or personal brand is, with the environment. And that's where I find the best speakers to really excel, because the best speakers are also the best listeners. They're the best folks who understand the vibe and the environment of the place. So if you're going into an interview, yeah, I would probably recommend against swearing. Unless it's some kind of a vibe where you see everyone swearing, you see the interviewer swearing, and they might come out to and say, oh, actually, we take pride in our culture and everyone swears, and
Right.
this is just the way that we are.
Yeah.
Yeah, then you have a green flag there. Then you know that, yeah, you can swear if you want
Yeah,
to.
no, I never
But
suggest swearing during
yeah.
interviews. This was more something for me personally, as I'm working on my public brand and speaking. It's something that I get a lot of feedback on, positive and negative, and most people don't comment at
Yeah.
all. Some people love that I'm doing that, and some people hate that I'm doing it. And 95% of people give me zero feedback on it one way or the other.
The one thing that I would say is that if you're in a public speaking scenario and you're going to be swearing a lot, if it's literally part of your narrative in one way or the other, and if you have swear words on the screen, for example, then checking with
Yeah.
the organizer
Yep.
helps. That doesn't come as a surprise to
They're your
them.
audience, like you said earlier. Awesome, Nausheen. We are running low on time, and you delivered so much great content here, including giving me some feedback on a conundrum I had. But last two questions I have for you. What is one last piece of sick career advice you have for our audience of ambitious professionals who are looking to own their career?
Just because you're doing one thing, it doesn't mean that's the only thing that is tied to your identity, doesn't define you, and neither is it the one thing that you should be doing forever. And I've faced this twice in my life where I've built my identity around the role that I've been playing at work. And I've had to change that. And that's what actually kept me hanging on to jobs or roles that I had outgrown, because I identified with them. I said, I'm a filmmaker. And I said that for the longest time. I had to break away from that identity to be able to grow in the direction that I needed to. So don't define yourself by one specific role or job. Understand that you're a rich, nuanced being that has many layers, many things to offer, many different directions that you can go in. And don't be afraid of exploring a direction just because you may not have qualifications in it or experience in it.
Yeah, don't define yourself by your job. I think that's so critical. So many people pivot, and you're not in the first job that you were out of school. And I don't know, what number pivot are you on in your career? What do you say?
Oh gosh. It depends on what you count. If you count my brief time as a stand-up comedian, my time as an improv
Right.
performer,
You probably had
as
desire
a,
to be like
it's
Amy Poehler
probably
one day or something like that, or whoever. Yeah.
yeah, so it's probably at least my fifth
Okay.
pivot
I'm on
in
my
that
seventh.
sense.
So if you make the mistake of
Yeah.
defining yourself by your job or your company or your current role, just be comfortable with that definition being malleable in the future. If you're even going to define that
Mm.
role, and we could just say, "Hey, right now I'm a stand-up comic or improv artist or whatever," and just say right now because
Mm.
it can change.
Yeah. It's all about how you talk to
Yeah.
yourself.
Last question. This was awesome. How can people find you? If people want to reach out to you, what's the best way to find Nausheen Chen in this world of ours?
Coach, that's my website. So there you'll find lots of free goodies. I have hundreds of free resources there, blogs, videos that you can look up if you want to become a more impactful speaker. That's speaking.coach. Otherwise, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm the only Nausheen Chen there. So hopefully you can find me there if you like and send me a friend request.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate the time. I appreciate the insights. And it will be a while until we have another purple haired guest on this podcast. But thank you so much for your generosity of your time, your insight, and helping me become a better speaker.
Thank you so much, Alan. This was so much fun. Thanks for
Thank you.
having me.